We left off last time. I just introduced Virgil's Aeneid to you. We looked at books 1 and 2 a little bit, and the account of the fall of Troy that takes place there. If you recall, I said that Virgil was following in Homer's footsteps by writing an epic, and not just writing an epic, but using all of the conventions of the epic, which he sees established in Homer's 2 epics, and yet seeks to not just emulate his hero Homer, but to outdo him. And he does that in a variety of ways. One of the most obvious ones will be in the fact that he presents an epic of a whole people, the Roman people, as opposed to just individuals, the Achilles or Odysseus. But another is that he, in terms of the structure, presents, remember Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Virgil writes the Aeneid in 12 books. Homer writes the Iliad in 24, the Odyssey in 24. And he also inverts the epics here to some degree. He begins with Virgil on a series of wanderings, like an Odyssey. And then in the second half, books 7 to 12, he'll give us an Iliad, because there's a battle that then takes place when he finally gets onto Roman soil. There's battles that ensue, and he'll have to fight the native Etruscans in order to establish Rome. So it's a sort of an inversion of the epics there, because the wanderings precede the battles, whereas in Homer, the battle precedes the wanderings. But they both begin the same place. I said this to you. They both begin in this place, Troia. Troy, or in the Bible, it's called Troas, where Paul the Apostle lands, interestingly. And someone online suggested that maybe the reason that that's being put in the book of Acts by Luke, the Apostle, is that he wants some sort of comparison to be made by the reader between Virgil's account of the Aeneid and the foundation of Rome, and Paul's sense that the new Rome is going to be established rather by Jesus Christ through Paul the missionary's work. So he mentions Troas in Acts 16, but that's on the second missionary journey. There's going to be a third missionary journey. It's certainly not a linear progression there, but I think there's probably some merit to that. Obviously, there is a place called Troas in those days, but it's given no significance by Paul the Apostle in that account. It's not mentioned that it's this 4,000-year-old city that is the central city for the 2 great epics of the ancient world, those by Homer and that by Virgil. But that's where they begin. And as I say, this epic begins from the side of the losers of the battle, the Trojans. Where do they go after their city is overthrown and lies in flames? Well, they go on a series of wanderings from here to Pergamum and onwards, and they end up in Carthage over here, which happens to be the site of the Roman people's ancient enemy, Carthage. And they will fight a series of wars that are going to determine the fate of the Mediterranean. Is the Mediterranean going to be governed by Carthage, or is it going to be governed by Rome? By the time Virgil writes it, that's ancient history. We know that the Romans defeat the Carthaginians. But when Aeneas is wandering, both empires are just being established. The Carthaginian city, which is ruled over by the figure of Dido, is just starting to emerge as a great city, and Rome does not even yet exist. Aeneas will eventually ground it, at least according to Virgil. According to legend, it's Remus and Romulus, the 2 twins that suckle from a she-wolf, which is there on Roman coins and so forth. That's the legendary account. Virgil connects it to this figure of Aeneas, even though he probably lived 300 years before that putative time, because he wants to show the connection with the Trojan War with the epic account, and also wants to connect his son, that is Aeneas' son, little Iulus, with the present-day emperor. The present-day emperor, whose name is Caesar Augustus. Octavius, the adopted son of none other than Julius Caesar, who adopted him into his family and made him thereby his own lineage traces back to this account. So he's giving him not just the history of the Roman people, he's giving us the history of Augustus Caesar, who's now called Caesar the Great. That's what Augustus means. And remember, I said this is contemporaneous with the account that we're told about in the Gospels of another king emerging in a little backwater of the Roman Empire in a town called Bethlehem, where the King of Kings and Lord of Lords is also said to be arising. And you can be sure that when the writers of the Gospel accounts are writing that, they're aware, and the Christians are very much aware, when they declare that Jesus is Lord, that they are echoing and actually contradicting the declaration coming from Rome that Caesar is Lord. And there is no other Lord. You will bow your knee to Caesar. He's a God. So when they say Jesus is Lord, they are declaring the exact same thing. And also, if Jesus is Lord, that means Caesar is not Lord. So the contradiction there is evident to those of their day. It's very obvious. It might not be obvious for you when you read your account, but it was to all of those in their day. And as I say, this account by Virgil becomes the account of the Roman Empire and clothed in epic form. So this story will be read for not just in the generation of Augustus Caesar. This will become a manual for reading and learning how to write Latin for thousands of years. If people want to learn to write Latin, they read Virgil. So every schoolboy who learns Latin, learns how to write Latin, will read this account for a very long time. The great Saint Augustine talks about Dido and Carthage and how he used to love the Aeneid and love the style of Virgil and so forth. Well, he and every other child who went to school. So this is, when I say Homer is great and starts the whole epic tradition, that's not to say he's as nearly as influential as Virgil is. Much greater in the estimation in terms of influence culturally, because the Latin language becomes it's the language of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire lasts for a very long time. And the Latin language lasts even beyond the fall of the Roman Empire in the under the reign of the Holy Roman Emperor. And so when it becomes Christianized, they still write in Latin, and they learn Latin, and they read Virgil, even though they think he's a pagan. They think that he writes good Latin, and so we're going to read him in schools, and we'll learn something about our identity. So I said that last time. I left off with the account of this man Aeneas, and this famous picture of Aeneas fleeing Troy. Let's see if I got the image here. Oh yeah, there's the famous image. That's as good as anything. Pious Aeneas with his father on his shoulder, on his back, carrying him out of the flames, holding the son of his little son, the hand of his son Iulus. His wife Creusa in the background, who gets lost in the midst of the chaos and the flames. He loses his wife, and he mourns her. He didn't mean to lose her, but in the midst of all the chaos and the flames and the smoke, he carries out his father on his back, and he carries his son's hand, but his wife perishes. Doesn't know what happened to her. But he also holds the household gods of the Trojans with him, and this is really significant. I talked about this. It's part of the piety of Aeneas that he honors his father, he looks after his son who represents the future, and he also reveres the gods. So he's called Pious Aeneas throughout this. He becomes a model of piety. This is the key feature of Aeneas that we don't see in Achilles or Odysseus. They're praised for their reverence of the god, but they're not called Pious Aeneas or Achilles or Pious Odysseus. They're called wise if they're Odysseus. Or in the case of Achilles, what will he be? Swift-footed Achilles or godlike Achilles. He's great, but he's not pious. This man is a religious figure in many ways. And it's the Roman religion. And what are the features of the Roman religion? They love their country. He does it all for the glory of Rome. His son represents the glory of Rome. This is Troy on his shoulders. He's carrying Troy, his father who grew up in Troy. He grew up in Troy. He's going to carry his father with him and his gods, but he's going to hold the hand of the boy who will be the great forebear of Caesar Augustus. And that's the message that's being trumpeted throughout this early account. So I left you off there last time, and I wanted to pick it up here, and we're going to do a really quick tour of this. I'm going to pick it up in book 4. Again, the account over in Troy goes down here briefly up, and we're going to find ourselves in book 4 right here in Carthage. And I'm going to read book 4 from book 4. Because book 4, books 1 to 3 is Aeneas telling Dido how he got from Troy to where he is. In the same way that Odysseus recounts to the Phaeacians how he left Troy and ended up on the island with Calypso. And he tells us all the wanderings and all the weird and wonderful creatures he met. Remember the Scylla and the Charybdis and the lotus eaters and the Cyclops, and all of those in books 9 to 12. Remember that? And he goes down to the underworld and all that. He tells those stories to the Phaeacians, and then it returns to the present day, to the audience's response to that, and the Phaeacians are delighted. Here the audience is none other than the Queen of Carthage. And how does she respond to this tale? Book 4. But the queen, wounded long by intense love, feeds the hurt with her life blood. Weakened by hidden fire, the hero's courage often returns to mind, and the nobility of his race. His features and his words cling fixedly to her heart, and love will not grant restful calm to her body. The new day's dawn was lighting the earth with Phoebus' brightness and dispelling the dew-wet shadows from the sky when she spoke ecstatically to her sister, her kindred spirit. Anna, sister, how my dreams terrify me with anxieties. Who is this strange guest who has entered our house? With what boldness he speaks, how resolute in mind and warfare. Truly, I think, and it's no idle saying, that he's born of a goddess. Fear reveals the ignoble spirit. Alas, what misfortunes test him. He's just like Odysseus. The suffering. What battles he spoke of, what he has undergone. If my mind was not set fixedly and immovably, never to join myself with any man in the bonds of marriage. Because first love betrayed me, cheated me through dying. If I were not wearied by marriage and bridal beds, perhaps I might succumb to this one temptation. Anna, yes, I confess, since my poor husband Sychaeus' death, when the altars were blood-stained by my murderous brother, he's the only man who stirred my senses, troubled my wavering mind. I know the traces of the ancient flame. But I pray rather that earth might gape wide for me to its depths, or the all-powerful Father hurl me with his lightning bolt down to the shadows, to the pale ghosts and deepest night of Iarbas, before I violate you, honor, or break your laws. He who first took me to himself has stolen my love. Let him keep it with him and guard it in the grave. So saying, her breast swelled with her rising tears. So the response of Dido, the Queen of Carthage, is to pronounce that the man who has told this story has captured her heart. If there were any man who could rekindle the desire to be married, it would be this man. And she vows, however, that she will not betray her dead husband. She will remain unmarried. And we will find in the account here that she's already repulsed the offer of marriage from various African princes. Remember, she's landed here in Carthage, but all along North Africa, there are princes the chief of whom's name is Iarbas, who's offered to marry her and create a political alliance. He's a local prince, a king. And you, O queen, who've also come from overseas, will marry me, I'll gladly have your hand. And she said, no, I'm not going to marry again. I'm going to remain faithful to my dead husband. And he says, okay. But now Aeneas is here, and what did I tell you last time about the goddesses that lie behind the story? Who lies behind the Carthaginian people? Yes, Juno. And who's the goddess that lies behind the Trojans? Aphrodite. And those two hate each other, and their peoples hate each other. And these two representatives of those people have no idea that they've been caught up in a war that not only is between peoples, but between goddesses. And worse still, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, in Latin called Venus, doesn't fight fair. She's going to get Cupid to shoot an arrow into Dido's heart, and she will fall for the man who will destroy her. And she does. She makes a vow right here that she will, rather that the earth might gape wide for me to its depths, or the all-powerful Father hurl me with the lightning bolt down to the shadows of the pale ghost and deepest night of Iarbas, before I violate you, honor, or break your laws. So she vows she will not marry anyone. Or here's the consequences. She takes a sacred vow, I will not. And then she falls from her passions overrule her mind. She burns with desire for this man, and she destroys her kingdom in the process and herself. So the story of Dido, Queen of Carthage, gets told and recounted in Western culture through operas and through paintings. I could throw up a bunch of paintings. I don't have the time for it, but by all means look up them. Dido, Queen of Carthage. Famous operas, famous paintings and it's like a mini tragedy. And people are sympathetic towards Dido because, after all, she gets effectively, she's a pawn between the goddesses here. And her own goddess, Venus, is tricked by Venus. Because Venus says, well, I could read it to you, but I'm not going to get into it there because it'll take too long and I want to move forward here. But she says, Venus, or rather Juno comes along and says, I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. You're going to make Dido love this man, and you think you're going to rule over her, and you're going to rule over me. She says, how about if we marry them? Will you accept that? Juno's the goddess of marriage, by the way. And Juno's crafty. She says she knows that if they marry, that she wins. And Venus knows if they have sex and don't get married, she wins. So Venus says, okay, that's a deal. We'll marry them. What happens in the marriage? Let's see here if we can just jump ahead to it. So here's the contrast between them. Soon as Juno, Jupiter's beloved wife, saw it clearly that Dido was gripped by such heart sickness and her reputation, no obstacle love, she spoke to Venus. You and that son of yours certainly take the prize, and plenty of spoils, a great and memorable show of divine power, whereby one woman's trapped by the tricks of two gods. But the truth's not escaped me. You've always held the halls of high Carthage under suspicion, afraid of my city's advanced defenses. But where can that end? Why such rivalry now? Why don't we work on eternal peace instead, and a wedding pact? You've achieved all that your mind was set on. Dido's burning with passion, and she's drawn the madness into her very bones. Here's my deal. Our two peoples will be one. There'll be a peace. Across the Mediterranean, we'll join our peoples. The Carthaginians and the Romans will rule together. Now, Juno's crafty because there is no Rome. he hasn't even founded the city of Rome yet. If they marry and they stay in Carthage, the Carthaginians will rule. She knows that Venus isn't very smart. She works through other means. She's not the strategist, but she is in this case. But there's the proposal. Eternal peace. Now, this is the very claim of Caesar Augustus, by the way. He declares a Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, when he rules. And the reason he can declare it is because he doesn't make alliances. He crushes his enemies. The reason that we have a Pax Romana is there are no more opponents. They're all down. They're gone. And so we have a Roman Empire. Now that's lying ahead in the future. This is before Rome has even arisen as a city. There is no city that's called Rome yet. But the proposal here is that the peoples work together and become and rule together. She knowing that if they do that, he never leaves Carthage and Rome never comes into existence. Venus is not so foolish as to think that this is going to work with them. But let's rule these people together with equal sway. Let her be slave to a Trojan husband and entrust her Tyrians to your hand as the dowry. Venus began the reply to her like this, since she knew she'd spoken with deceit in her mind to divert the empire from Italy's shores to Libya's. Who'd be mad enough to refuse such an offer or choose to make war on you, so long as fate follows up, you say, with action? But fortune makes me uncertain as to whether Jupiter, Juno's husband, wants a single city for Tyrians and Trojan exiles and approves the mixing of races and their joining in league together. You're his wife. You can test his intent by asking. Do it, I'll follow. Then royal Juno replied like this, that task's mine. She's not going to go ask her husband because her husband's going to say no. She said, I'm going to get my way. Leave that up to me. I'll go ask Jupiter if he's okay. And guess what? She's going to come back and say, oh yeah, Jupiter says it's fine. She'll lie. They're both lying to each other, and they know they're lying to each other. The problem here is that Venus already governs and has already won because Dido has given over to her passions. Her reason, her mind is enslaved to her passions. She acts like she already is a member of Venus's people. And for Virgil, who is a Stoic, this is the worst possible outcome for any person. Just like Plato. Plato says, don't be a slave to your passions. Follow reason. Remember we talked about that in the Republic? That you don't want your passions to rule over you. You don't want the people to rule over you. You need the governor. The governing faculty, the philosophers need to rule your city. Virgil believes the same thing. We need the rational part of our nature to rule over the passions. And Virgil's problem is that the whole Roman people are ruled by Venus. So they can never be the ideal people. I said that last time. That's part, even though he's going to proclaim the epic of the Romans and the fact that they will rule eternally, his own knowledge of the nature of Venus and the nature of the passions tells him that this eternal empire can never last because it's built on the foundation of passions. And passions are no way to rule anything, let alone yourself, but particularly not yourself. And Stoics, their whole ideal is to rule the passions. The mind, you're to take control of your desires and keep them in place. Avoid all alliances that will lead you to be overruled by your passions. But they make this pact, and it's a lying pact on both sides. But they agree to a marriage, and they go out on a hunt. And while they're on the hunt, Dido and Aeneas, a big storm comes, and the two of them go into a cave. And then they get married. They call it a marriage. Who's there for the marriage? Just the two of them. Just the two of them. Now, in Christian marriage services, there always has to be a witness. Always. Even in a non-Christian marriage service, there has to be witnesses. If you go to Las Vegas and get married, they'll yank somebody in so that there's a third party to witness the fact that because it's a public act. It's not a private act between two people. If you think marriage is just between you and your partner, you're deceived about what the nature of marriage is. It's a political act. It's a declaration of loyalty to a God. Even if you're an atheist, it's still a public act. It's a political act. It's in the interest of the state to preserve the sanctity of marriage, because the family is the foundation of all political life. And the moral sanctity of the marriage bed is of interest to every culture, and it has been throughout human history. So when divorce is rampant, it means that the culture is in free fall. If marriage is something that you do and then you do again, you do it, then you've lost the whole meaning and significance of marriage. It's not supposed to be over and over and over and over. It's a union sacred to the gods, devoted to the gods. When if you're Christian, you make vows, and there's a third party present. It might be a person, but God himself is present for the vows that take place. Here, there are only two people. To make it worse, not only do you have two people, they are the heads of their people. One's a queen and one is the leader of the Trojans. So they are their king and the queen, more or less, of the two people, and their marriage is a private ceremony. Well, guess what? It has no standing as a marriage whatsoever. Now, does that reflect on the people involved, Dido and Aeneas? Do they really love each other? And I think from the text, it looks like, and here's where the tragedy is, it looks like they do. Virgil's Aeneas seems to genuinely love Dido. And she, for her part, has totally fallen for Aeneas. But they're caught in a power play between the two goddesses, and Venus regards not only Juno as her enemy, but the people as the enemy of her people, and she's just determined to destroy them before they even get off the ground. And she does so. So Venus will destroy Carthage, the city of Carthage, represented by Dido, before it can even get off the ground. Now, eventually it will play out, but this historic hostility between the Romans and the Carthaginians is started right here in this account. This is why, in a sense, it's quasi-historical, but it has almost a mythic significance, because it explains the great rivalry over the two great powers of the Mediterranean over a few centuries, which you read about in any account of Roman history. So let me carry on here. But they go there, and the sky becomes filled with great rumbling, rain mixed with hail falls, and the Tyrian company and the Trojan men, with Venus's Dardan grandson, Aeneas, scatter here and there through the fields in their fear, seeking shelter, and Dido and the Trojan leader reach the very same cave. Oh, isn't that helpful? Primeval Earth and Juno of the nuptials give their signal, because they all agree with this. A marriage is happening. We got the goddesses are in agreement. The two people are in agreement. There is no other people around. What's going to happen then? And Virgil announced that first day is the source of misfortune and death. Why? Dido's no longer troubled by appearances or reputation. She no longer thinks of a secret affair. She calls it marriage, and with that name disguises her sin. Because the two of them are going to come out of there, and now it's he said, she said. And guess what's going to happen in the midst of that situation? Rumor. And rumor here is presented as a mythological beast with all sorts of eyes and all sorts of mouths and wings. And rumor is faster than anything else. And rumor is not going to care about truth or reputation. Rumor is just going to spread, just like the news of our day, a lot of fake news. And the rumors that are going to go out are that Juno, or rather Dido, is a dishonorable woman. And she doesn't care about her people at all. And Iarbas, the prince in North Africa who offered his hand in marriage, legitimately showing respect to her, is going to be furious that he was snubbed, and this effeminate Aeneas gets this queen. And you're going to see him call him that way. That's not my. But rumor raced at once through Libya's great cities. Rumor, compared with whom no other is as swift. She flourishes by speed and gains strength as she goes. First, limited by fear, she soon reaches into the sky, walks on the ground, and hides her head in the clouds. Earth, incited to anger against the gods, so they say, bore her last. A monster, vast and terrible, fleet-winged and swift-footed, sister to Chaos and Enceladus, who for every feather on her body has as many watchful eyes below. Marvelous to tell. As many tongues speaking, as many listening ears, she flies, screeching by night through the shadows between earth and sky, never closing her eyelids in sweet sleep. By day, she sits on the ground on tall rooftops or high towers and scares great cities as tenacious of lies and evil as she is messenger of truth. Now, in delight, she fills the ears of the nations with endless gossip, singing fact and fiction alike. Aeneas has come, born of Trojan blood, a man whom lovely Dido deigns to unite with. Now they're spending the whole winter together in indulgence, forgetting their royalty. Trapped by shameless passion, the vile goddess spread this here and there on men's lips. Immediately she slanted her course towards King Iarbas and inflamed his mind with words and fueled his anger. The consequence of somebody giving themselves over to the passions is that it starts an inferno, just like the inferno that brought down the city of Troy in flames. Now Dido is inflamed with passion. And psychologically, she's inflamed. Her passions overrule her reason. And there's a supernatural element to it because we're told that Iarbas, which is the underworld, opens up and it's a hellish place. So there's all sorts of fire going on here that's about to consume poor Dido. And Iarbas prays to Jupiter to be avenged for this. And of course, Jupiter favors Iarbas. So guess what is going to happen? Not good. As the rumor goes down, by the way, Jupiter sends Mercury to Aeneas and says, you need to leave right now. You're fated to found the city of Rome. If you don't care about yourself, think about your little son. You got to go right now. Mercury, he sends Mercury. Aeneas is very upset by what he hears, but he says, yes, sir, I'm gone. Pious Aeneas, dutiful. What does it mean for Dido? It's not good. What's he supposed to do? His duty. He's a Roman. Does he love Dido? I think he does. Does that matter? It does not. He's a Roman. Romans do their duty, whatever the consequences. He's the representation of Roman virtue, which is obedience and duty for the glory of Rome. So he's the Roman model of manhood, pious towards the gods, pious towards his legacy and towards his son and the future. So Mercury gets sent. Aeneas agrees immediately, and Dido knows immediately that Aeneas has left her. Even when he's physically present, she knows, your thoughts aren't with me anymore, you don't care anymore. And he denies it, he lies to her. But his heart's gone, he tells the ship to prepare to flee, whatever. And she then degenerates into a spiral of self-destruction that is basically legendary. That's what the operas are written for, and the songs and the paintings. Because she basically fulfills her own vow that if she should betray her lately departed husband Sychaeus, that she be brought down to the underworld, and that Jupiter strike her with a lightning bolt. That's exactly what will happen. Dido resolves to die. Unhappy Dido, truly appalled by her fate, prayed for death. She was weary of gazing at the vault of heaven, and that she might complete her purpose and relinquish the light more readily, when she placed her offerings on the altar light with incense, she saw, terrible to speak of, the holy water blacken, and the wine she had poured changed to vile blood. She spoke of this vision to no one, not even her sister. There was a marble shrine to her former husband in the palace, that she decked out also with marvelous beauty, with snow-white fleeces, with festive greenery. From it she seemed to hear voices, and her husband's words calling her, when dark night gripped the earth, and the lonely owl on the roofs often grieved with ill-omened cries, drawing out its long call in a lament. And many a prophecy of the ancient seers terrified her with its dreadful warning. And she vows, and like Pentheus, seeing the Furies file past with twin sons and twin Thebes revealed to view. Thebes, what was in Thebes? Oedipus. Or like Agamemnon's son, Orestes, who slew his mother. Driven across the stage when he flees his mother's ghost, armed with firebrands and black snakes, while the avenging Furies crouch on the threshold, so that when overcome by anguish, she harbored the madness, and determined on death, she debated with herself over the time and the method, and going to her sorrow sister with a face that concealed her intent, calm, with hope on her brow, said, "Sister, I found a way. Rejoice with your sister, that will return him to me or free me from loving him." She's going to burn his clothing. Everything that reminds me of Aeneas. Get a bonfire ready. And I'm going to take all his stuff and I'm going to burn it. We're going to have a big bonfire. And her sister says, "Great. Get rid of the memory of that so-and-so. He's hurt you so bad. This is great." What does she intend to do with the bonfire? Jump into it. Torch herself, which she is going to do. But her sister doesn't even know it. "I'll destroy all memories of that wicked man," the priestess commands it. Saying this, she fell silent. Anna did not yet realize that her sister was disguising her own funeral with these strange rites. Her mind could not conceive of such intensity, and she feared nothing more serious than when Sychaeus died. So she prepared what was demanded. Now, when she does this, she stands, and this is the famous image. Her hair no longer braided back. It's in the wind. It's flying. It's mad. It's unloosened. Just like her passions run wild, her hair is blowing. It's unkempt. And the priestess intoned the names of 300 gods, of Iarbas, that is the underworld, of chaos, and the triple Hecate. Hecate is a witch. In Christian iconography, is Satan. But a god of the underworld. She's swearing by what's below. In the Roman and most pagan religions, what's below is what you swear by, not by what's above. The most sacred oaths are sworn by what we would call demonic forces. And here it is as well, I think. And she sprinkled water signifying the founts of Avernus. There were herbs too, cut by with a bronze sickle, moist with the milk of dark venom, and a caul acquired by tearing it from a newborn colt's brow, forestalling the mother's love. And then she eventually throws herself on this. And then Aeneas, as I say, Mercury comes on down and tells Aeneas to get the heck out of there, which he then does. But it's a terrible scene and a famous scene. And the question that we have as modern readers of it is, how are we supposed to read this episode? Are we supposed to feel sorry for Juno, or rather Dido? And the answer is no. We're not supposed to feel sorry for her at all. We're supposed to praise Aeneas's willingness to do his duty. That's how the epic is written. You're not supposed to feel sorry. Because if they had married and he'd followed his heart, Rome would not have come to existence. We're supposed to glorify in what Aeneas did in denying himself and putting his people first. This is a hard hero to like on a personal front, except if you're Roman and you realize that your identity is strongest in your people than in your own self. And so the virtue of living for others, and particularly not others, but Rome itself becomes the great virtue of the Roman Empire. And Aeneas becomes the representation of that for Virgil's whole audience. So it's an extraordinary passage. I want to skip over any comments or questions. I'll move swiftly on to book 6. which is the underworld, the descent into the underworld. Now, remember I said to you that Aeneas has come from Troy, and even at this point in the story, in Carthage, he's still very much of a Trojan man. He's here, in a sense, he's not very heroic. Because remember, he's supposed to do everything for the glory of Rome, and what does he do? He ends up falling in love with the queen of Carthage. And if it weren't for the gods, he would have stayed there. He didn't want to leave. If it were up to him, he would have stayed. And the gods said, go. And he obeyed. But obedience isn't very admirable as a characteristic, because he's not doing it of his own volition. He's doing it because he's been ordered. But again, that's Roman virtue. Do what you're told. Obey. If it's for the glory of Rome, do your duty, soldier. I don't care if you die. Just do it. And he does do it. So as I say, it might not appeal to us, and we may be moved like the Europeans who write the operas and paint the paintings. They may sympathize with Dido, but that's not Virgil's intention. We're not supposed to. When we come in an epic we're going to look at in a couple of weeks to Dante, we'll see that Dido is in hell. A woman who's given herself over to her passions and taken her own life is not to be admired. Even if she got dragged into it, she's still no one that we're supposed to look up to. So the message for Virgil's audience is, don't do what Dido does. Don't follow your heart. Don't follow your passions. Do the right thing. As I say, we've wandered far away from that, but that is most certainly Virgil's point of view here. No questions. And let me move on to book 6. Because in book 6, and I'm not using the translation that I gave you because I can't find it online so quickly. As I say, we have the Trojan hero Aeneas going to go down into the underworld just as Homer's Odysseus did. Remember, Homer's Odysseus went down into the underworld to find and consult of a medium by the name of Tiresias? Remember? He went down to the blind Tiresias, asking him where to go, how to go, what to do going forward, and was given a vision of the future. Virgil, who's trying to write an epic echoing Homer's epic, is going to send his hero down to the underworld. Now, this is part of what makes an epic, is a hero in the epic mold is capable of going down to the realm of the dead, where only the dead go and come back and yet return from it. Only certain types of heroes, and only a very few, ever return from the land of the dead. And of course, if you read any Tolkien, you'll know that this is what Aragorn does when he goes to the paths of the dead. That's why. He's an epic hero. Everyone is horrified when Aragorn goes down to the paths of the dead, including the elves. Everybody. But he knows he has to go there, and he goes down there and he calls them to follow him, and they do follow him because he is who he is. It's prophesied that the oath breakers will be restored when the heir of Elendil comes down. So it's not any old man, it's this particular man. Same here. It's not any old man who goes down into the underworld here. This is Aeneas. And if he can grasp the golden bough and tear it off, then he will be able to return from the land of the dead. Now, this reference to a golden bough, let me write it up here. Have you heard of the golden bough before? In the early 20th century, there was a English anthropologist, Scottish actually, by the name of Sir James Fraser, who wrote a long book, a comparative anthropological account of myths across the world. He called it the Golden Bough. But it's a reference to a line in Virgil's Aeneid. And it's about how pagan cultures worshipped through nature the gods. Sacred oaks, sacred trees, the pagans of Europe would have worshipped sacred oaks. The natives of this country, similar sorts of thing. There were sacred trees, rites, whatever, and rituals, and there would be shaman type figures. We have that here, and in fact, Aeneas is a shaman-like figure. He goes down to the realm of the dead and commits the appropriate rites that will allow him to commune with the dead as well. It's rather creepy, actually. But Fraser says in his comparative anthropological account, if you haven't heard of it, that these features of paganism are not only found in Europe, but across the entire world. And you might find that interesting. But the line, the golden bough, is from Virgil's Aeneid. Reference to this famous story. So anyway, and Aeneas is being sent there to fulfill his epic, heroic task of going to the dead and coming up reborn. When he goes down to the realm of the dead, he's a Trojan. When he arises up, it's a new birth, and he's a Roman. When he comes up, now his face is set towards Rome, and he's not going to turn back. He's ready to fight and win. Up to this point, he's been not very admirable. He's going to come up, and he's going to be the man ready for battle. Okay, so let me read a little bit of the account. Actually, I'm not going to do it on the screen behind me because it's faster if I do it in front of me. And I have the account and the sections that I want to read there. So it'll be a little bit different from your account behind me there. But these were the words he wept and said. He let the reins that curbed the fleet fall slack. At last he guides the Euboean coast of Cumae. The Trojans turn their prows around to see tenacious teeth. Their anchors grip the ships. The curving keels line up. They fringe the beach. And they go to seek the awful Sibyl, where she has her secret home, line 14. For there the seer of Delos, that is Apollo, remember the Delphic oracle? So inspires her mind and soul that she may know the future. And now they come upon Diana's grove, and now they reach the shrine, the roof of gold, where Daedalus, for so the tale is told, fled Minos' kingdom on swift wings. I'll skip all over that because he interfuses another famous story. But as he goes on, he goes to consult with the Sibyl, and the Sibyl is presented as a crazy, inspired priestess, prophetess. And she says, now call upon the fates for oracles. The god is here. The god. She's been inspired by the god Apollo. Apollo's inhabited her. As she says this before the doors, her face and color alter. Suddenly her hair is disarrayed, her breast heaves, and her wild heart swells with frenzy. She is taller now. Her voice is more than human, for the power of God is closing in. He breathes upon her. And are you slow to offer vows and prayers, Trojan Aeneas? Are you slow? She shouts. The terrifying house will never open the giant jaws before your vows are spoken. The Sibyl spoke and then was still. The Trojans' tough bones were shaken by chill shuddering. Their king pours prayers from his deepest breast. Phoebus, that is Apollo, you always pitied Troy's hard trials. You guided Dardan's spears and Paris's hand against the body of Achilles. You yourself led me along so many seas that bathed broad lands of far Massilian tribesmen, past fields fringed by the Syrtes sands. But after this, and at long last, we grasp the shores of fleeing Italy. May Troy's fortune have followed us so far, no farther. So he offers up a prayer, and she says to, in response to Aeneas, that he will reach the shore, and says in line 125, there is in Latium a new Achilles, he too, son of a goddess. And he's referring to Aeneas. Nor will Juno fail anywhere to hound the Teucrians, while you, a beggar in your need, implore the towns, the tribes throughout all Italy, the cause of so much Trojan misery, against a foreign bride, a foreign wedding. Do not relent before distress, but be far bolder than your fortune would permit. The first path to your safety, though it seem unlikely, shall be a Grecian city. So she's going to go to Greece before he goes to Rome. So Aeneas prays, and where is this that I want to see? There we go. Line 190. Does it even have 190 here? It doesn't have lines. That's annoying. Can I find this? No, I'll just read it. Hear what you first must accomplish, Trojan. A bough, line 190 in your text, is hidden in a shady tree. Its leaves and pliant stem are golden, set aside as sacred to Proserpine. The grove serves as its screen, and shades enclose the bough in darkened valleys. Only he may pass beneath earth's secret spaces who first plucks the golden-leaved fruit of that tree. Lovely Proserpine ordained that this be offered as her gift. And when the first bough is torn off, a second grows again, with leaves of gold, again of that same metal. So let your eyes search overhead, and when the bough is found, then pluck it down by hand as due. For if the fates have summoned you, the bough will break off freely, easily. But otherwise, no power can overcome it. Hard iron cannot help to tear it off. And more, the lifeless body of your friend now lies. But you still have to learn of this. Defiling your fleet with death while you still ask your destiny and linger at our threshold. And she tells him to go pick up his body and bury it, just like we saw in the Odyssey. So he goes his way, and he goes down, and he finds the golden bough, reaches up, grabs it, and he rips it off by force. Now, she says you can't do it by force, and then he goes and does it by force. Now, was it willed, or did he just take his fate? I think it's left a little ambiguous, but he does it nonetheless. He takes of the golden bough. And 285, and at once Aeneas plucks it, and eager breaks the hesitating bough and carries it into the Sibyl's house. So he breaks it. It doesn't fall off into his hand. Takes it to the Sibyl's house. So what this is it's an omen from the gods that he will descend to the underworld and come back up. That it's fated that that this be so. So the Romans make their own fate to some degree. They rule. It's their will that will determine the gods' wills. So down he goes, and when he goes down there, he sees all sorts of dead, and the landscape of the underworld is worthy of some attention. I'll just make some general comments rather than read too much more of this. But he goes down into the underworld without navigation. He's being led there by fate, just like in the Odyssey. And everyone falls over on his ship into a divine sleep except for him. And he has an unburied companion by the name of Palinurus, who's just like Elpenor in the Odyssey, who he has to go back and bury as well. So lots of parallels that are going on there. And he becomes like a shamanistic hero. You know what a shaman is? Like a medicine man, a man that communes with the dead, between the living and the dead. So there's an attribute to him which is more than just a man. He is a religious figure. He goes down, and he is going to hear of the future from his father, not this time from Tiresias, the blind prophet, but from his own father, Anchises. He's going to hear what will come. And there's a connection between Aeneas gaining this hidden knowledge and the action of the poet himself. That is a parallel running with the poet Virgil. And they go down into the earth, and along the way, he will find all sorts of figures. Let me just draw attention to a few of them here. Line 378, centaurs and double-bodied Scyllas. Remember Scylla and Charybdis? the 100-handed Briareus, a giant, the brute of Lerna, hissing horribly, a snake, Chimera, armed with flames, Gorgons and Harpies, and Geryon, the shade that wears 3 bodies, and here Aeneas, shaken suddenly by terror, grips his sword. He offers naked steel and opposes those who come. Had not his wise companion warned him, they were only thin lives that glide without a body in the hollow semblance of a form, he would in vain have torn the shadows with his blade. So all around him he sees these horrid shapes, but they have no substance. They're shadows. They're called shades. And the existence here is immaterial, basically. And the way that he gets them to speak is he gives them blood. Gives them blood. And at that point they can speak. It's the same in the Odyssey. Same sort of, and there's, again, this sort of grueling or kind of horrifying image here. But as he goes down, he will meet the dead who are compared to leaves that fall on the ground, just like we'll see here in a few weeks if the Indian summer ever ends. Piles of leaves. The dead are like leaves on the ground. There are that many of them. And they can't get where they want to go until they pass over to the other side of the river, and they have to get the help of the ferryman whose name is Charon. And he's presented as this demonic figure, particularly when we come to Dante, he'll present Charon there. But he's a ferryman that you pay to get the passage. Now, how do you pay him? When you die, your relatives put 2 gold coins on your eyes. You're buried with the gold coins, and Charon takes the coins as payment to get you over to the other side where the dead reside. And if you don't pay him, you stay on this side of the realm of the dead and you're in agony. I don't know what it is about it that gives you a sense of release to go across in the realm of the dead, but it's there. They're in agony and torment until they get to the realm of the dead. Now, when they get down there, we're going to find that it's a rather different place than is presented in Homer's Underworld, because we'll start to see allegorized figures here representing ways of dying. So we'll get personified abstractions. So we'll meet grief and hunger and strife and war and death. These are figures that he meets in the underworld, as well as the mythological beasts that I talked about. And so what we're thinking of is death in metaphysical terms. How do we come to die? Famine, disease, war. These are all means of coming to death. Well, they're allegorized now. So it's thinking it in metaphysical terms. The ways that we experience evil in this world are related to the underworld. The underworld is now being associated with evil in a way that we don't see in Homer. It's not just the realm of the dead, it's a place of evil. And he meets all sorts of allegorical figures. And he will find a king of the underworld whose name is Minos. And Minos wraps his tail around the dead and sends them where they're going to go. The number of times he wraps his tail around the dead is the place that they end up going to. So he's a sort of a judge in the underworld. They go where they belong. Passes judgment on. Look at line 570 and so forth. So the shades are similar to Homer's, but now we have more of a sense of good and evil. But note that the good don't go to heaven. They go to a different place in the underworld, and the different place they go to is called the Elysian Fields. That's where the best of the dead go. They're still in the underworld, but it's called the Elysian Fields. In France, they have the Champs-Élysées. It's named after that. You heard the Champs-Élysées? Yeah. That's the Elysian Fields. It's a place where the glorious dead go. The virtuous, they still go to the underworld. They don't go up to the heavens. Now, there are exceptions to that. The exception to it is figures that become divinized, like Caesar Augustus, and become a star. But those are very few. Only the gods get elevated in that way. Heroes just simply go down to the underworld. And interestingly, and let me see if I can find this here. I have to recount this story. And there are 9 circles of the Underworld, and they are called prisoners of Styx. Yes, 595. He wanders down there, and who does he meet? Oh, by the way, he meets Cerberus. Remember from the Harry Potter, the three-headed Cerberus is there. If you're interested, 550. And a snake. Again, Harry Potter. Rowling's plucked it right out of this account. But he goes down there and he meets, lo and behold, somebody has beat him down to the underworld. Who is it? Dido. Among them, wandering in the great forest, line 593, with her wound still fresh, Phoenician Dido. Note she's not called Carthaginian Dido. She's from Phoenicia. Phoenician Dido. And when the Trojan hero recognized her, dim shape among the shadows, just as one who either sees or thinks he sees among the cloud banks, when the month is young, the moon rising, he wept and said with tender love, unhappy Dido, then the word I had was true, that you were dead, that you pursued your final moment with the sword? Did I bring only death to you? Queen, I swear by the stars, the gods above, and any trust that may be in this underneath, I was unwilling when I had to leave your shores. But those same orders of the gods that now urge on my journey through the shadows, through abandoned thorny lands and deepest night, drove me by their decrees, and I could not believe that with my going I should bring so great a grief as this. But stay your steps, do not retreat from me. Whom do you flee? This is the last time fate will let us speak. These were the words Aeneas, weeping, used, trying to soothe the burning, fierce-eyed shade. She turned away, eyes to the ground, her face no more moved by his speech than if she stood as stubborn flint or some Marpessan crag. At last she tore herself away, she fled, and still his enemy, into the forest of shadows where Sychaeus, once her husband, answers her sorrows, gives her love for love. Nevertheless, Aeneas, stunned by her unkindly fate, still follows at a distance with tears and pity for her as she goes. So again, if you think that Aeneas is not moved by Dido, I think this puts any of that to rest. But he does abandon her. This is what makes him the hero. It's not because his love's too cold. It's because his love for Rome overrules all other loves. It's the great love of country and of his ancestors that moves him. But you can see that he is broken up by it. But you can see for his part the great lesson of history that there's no hell quite so hot as a woman scorned is proved true here in this. She is angry, and she's still angry and will be undyingly angry. There's no sating Dido's wrath at Aeneas. But she's, as I say, in the underworld. Now, I just think it's an interesting passage. Now, I'll carry on. She still has some human qualities, which is a bit unusual, because, I mean, Virgil is, in general, he's presenting the shades as having no personality at all. Maybe it's just because she got there, but she's still angry with him, which she shouldn't be, really. She's supposed to be just like a shade, just this empty person. But as he goes down, he encounters all sorts of dead warriors, and he finds out, he meets the husband of Helen after Paris, who's killed by the sackers of Troy. And he brings the knowledge that at the end of this life, and this is interesting, and this is Virgil's account, it's the same as Homer's, but it's Virgil's account. The way it works in the underworld is you are in the underworld as a shade for 1,000 years. And at the end of that, Plato believed this as well, you are dipped in the river Lethe, whereby you forget your identity. And then you're reborn. You're reincarnated in another body. That's their account. So if you want to know where accounts of incarnation, reincarnation come from in pagan mythology, it's here. They're throughout the Golden Bough as well. Reincarnation. And in general, in those types of myths, you're rewarded with a better fate if you acted well while you're alive, or a worse fate if you act in an ignoble way in this life. But your identity is totally wiped. You have no memory of it, and then you're reincarnated. Let me move on to the end of this account, book 6. He goes and he hears the account from his father of what will come after him, first of all, and this is important. And his father tells him of what will happen in the future. So he's given a history of the people of Rome after his founding of a city there, eventually, and the Carthaginian War, and all the way leading up to Julius Caesar, and eventually to Augustus Caesar. So it's all the way up to that point. A historical account. And Romulus and Numitor and the Tarquin kings and Maximus and the Carthaginians and the Gauls and Quirinius, and with rising tears Anchises speaks to Aeneas and says this: "My son, do not search out the giant sorrow your people are to know. The fates will only show him to earth, but they will not allow a longer stay for him. The line of Rome, O high ones, would have seemed too powerful for you if his gifts too had been its own. What cries of mourning will the field of Mars send out across that overwhelming city? What funerals, O Tiber, the river that runs through Rome, will you see when you glide past the new-made tomb? No youth born of the seed of Ilium, Troy, will so excite his Latin ancestors to hope." And on they go. But the prophecy is that there will be a Pax Romana, and Augustus Caesar will rule eternally over the future. And then he concludes the epic. And let me go to that conclusion, the epic. Book 6. And I will actually pull this up here because it's too important not to. Now, sleep, it says, has portals, twain, whereof the one is horn. They say, an easy exit gives to visions true. The other gleaming white with polished ivory, the dead employ to people night with unsubstantial dreams. Here now Anchises bids his son farewell, and with Sibylla, his companion sage, up through that ivory portal, lets him rise back to his fleet and his dear comrades all. Aeneas hastes. So what happens here? He's just given a prophecy that Augustus Caesar will bring about a golden age, that the Pax Romana will hold eternally, that it will be, the Roman people will reign forever and ever. That's the prophecy given to him. And then at the conclusion of it, says that there are two exits out of here. One's made of horn, the other is made of ivory. The one from which true prophetic utterance comes goes through the gate of horn, polished horn. The false dreams come from the land of, or the portal of ivory. And where does Aeneas go through? The false portal. What's Virgil saying about the golden age and the glory of Rome? You wouldn't expect this in a Roman epic. But again, if you take what I said on board about the nature of Virgil as a Stoic and his lack of trust in the Roman people's commitment to passion and violence, which as a Stoic he is willing to use but does not think is going to lead to any lasting golden age, it will come when there is a sort of the lion lying down with the lamb. And I'll give you an account when we come to Dante, a prophecy given by Virgil in his eclogues that speaks of such a golden age. And it sounds messianic, quite frankly. If you're a Christian, it sounds like it's plucked right from Isaiah. That's how he thinks that the golden age will come about, by a figure that's a child who will lie down with lions and with snakes and not be harmed by it. Is again highly messianic. That's Virgil's view. This view that the Pax Romana is going to be brought about through the means of the sword by Augustus Caesar is a false dream. He presents it in his epic, but still he says it's a false dream. So he asserts the greatness of Rome, and at the same time he says it's not going to last. Right? You get it? Makes sense? So what's really interesting when you observe that is that when you hear accounts of epics of ages past, you tend to want to see them as being like propaganda. Right? This is the Roman epic. It gives the propaganda of the Roman Empire. Oh, we're great. Romans are the greatest people that ever lived. And yet, within it, you can see there's a lot more subtlety and sophistication than that. It's going to declare the glory of Rome, and Aeneas as the man who best represents that ideal, and at the same time, the man who writes the great epic is critical of his own hero and his own people. It's extraordinary. It's sort of like an Old Testament prophet. It talks about the glory of Israel, and they're calling their vocation, and they're going to fail in their calling. So it has that prophetic edge to it. It's a self-critical one. So this is why it's a great text. It's not just propaganda. There's more to it than that. It's not just the telling. It's not just the endurance of the epic, but it's the way it's told and the subtlety of it that makes it great. Now, I said I was going to go on to book 12, and good luck with that. Now, the conclusion of it. So, what have I got? I've got 5 minutes. So, I'm not even going to go to the text. Book 12. As I said, book 7. So, he arises from the underworld, a Roman now. Mount Etna lands here, lots of battles along the way, as he has to subdue the indigenous peoples of Italy, some of whom are Italians, some of whom are Etruscans. There's a whole variety of people there in Latium. It's not Italy as we call it, but although the country we now call it is Italy, but that's not what it is. They're just different tribes there, and they don't want Aeneas there. They want to stop him from founding a city and founding an empire, and he's going to have to battle them all into submission, just like a good old Roman. He's going to beat all of his enemies, make political alliances, make marriages, and so forth. And in the end, there's a battle scene between Aeneas and the great hero Evander, who will eventually give way to what's his name? Evander. And a battle scene between Aeneas and, let me get to this, book 12, Turnus. And what we have here is like Achilles versus Hector, except now it's flipped around. Because Aeneas is Hector, but Hector wins this time. Aeneas, who represents the Trojan people, is now a Roman. And the Roman is going to do what the Trojan didn't do. So we have an echo of the Iliad, where you have the two great heroes at the end. We've got Hector, the representative, the greatest representative of the Trojans, out fighting mano a mano, hand-to-hand combat against Achilles. And as we know, Achilles kills him and drags him around the city 3 times. Here we have Aeneas versus Turnus, and Turnus is going to get killed by Aeneas. But how is he killed by Aeneas? He falls to his knees and begs for his life. And Aeneas sees his friends, something taken from his friend's armor on him, and maddened by rage takes his sword and just thrusts it through him. It's really ignoble, because he's on his knees and he's begging. He doesn't want to die, and he's moved by his passions to kill him. And he does kill him. He runs him through. That ends the epic. The hero wins, but he does so in a way we don't admire. We don't admire a man who runs another man through with a sword when he's on his knees, begging. But he's angry. And again, Virgil is, I think, saying something about the foundation of a people led by a man whom we're supposed to admire, but he does his duty and he doesn't, the virtue of the conduct. He's not very admirable in the end, but he does his duty. And if duty is all that you care about, then he does his duty. So as I say, Aeneas as a hero is hard to admire in the same way we will admire Odysseus or Achilles even. His chief virtue is his commitment, to, his piety, and his commitment to his people at all costs, which we usually see as like, it's a little shabby. But as a result of this, as I say, the people of Rome are founded. And interestingly, right at the point of his death, Turnus appeals to his piety. Line 1245 if you want. Just like at the end of the Iliad, Priam begs for Achilles' body or for his son Hector's body from Achilles, and Achilles gives him up because he said, I've never seen a man like this. Here's my enemy, he's come into my tent, and if I kill him, the war's over, and Achilles lets him go because he admires Priam. This man, I've never seen such bravery. An old man comes in to reclaim his son's body, even though he knows that if I kill him, the war is over. This is a great man. Same thing happens here, but he sees it's a belt from his friend Pallas on it, and he stabs him through. So there's the founding of Troy and the killing of Turnus are sort of theatrically linked. And then the question is, remember I said this is the Pax Romana, the Golden Age. Is this really going to be the end of violence? Or is this going to be endless violence? And I think Virgil is quite clear. It will never stop. Virgil the pacifist, I don't know if he's a pacifist, but he doesn't believe that violence will ever bring about the Golden Age. By the way, I said that Aeneas would be made into a god, not in the story. It's not told in the story. And maybe because Virgil didn't finish the story. By the way, he left the story unfinished, and when he died, he left orders to burn it. Don't preserve it. I'm not happy with it. Burn the epic. And they didn't burn it, needless to say. They kept it, but he was not finished with it. Maybe but anyway, that's how it concludes. Any comments or questions? I know we're done for today. I gave you a lot all at once. You're quiet, strangely subdued. Too much reading week. Anyway, I'm done for today.